The show you're about to hear is part of a two-part series on domestic violence featuring Lenny Jennison of Victim's Voice podcast. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into part one. Hey guys, this is Roger That, and this is your host, Gorgo. Today is a special episode where I'm going to cover a very important issue to me, which is domestic violence. Roger will not be joining us for this episode, but don't worry, he'll be back soon. I do have a special guest joining me today, and I'm pretty excited. Lenny has agreed to come on and talk to us about his experience as a CPS worker. So Lenny, thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited.
I'm excited too, and it sounds weird to be excited to talk about domestic violence, but I think it's a really important issue, and something really compelled me to want to make this episode that focused on this issue. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, I originally grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts, and I was in and out of foster homes. I remember the day I was taken from my family by CPS, and then after being removed from my family due to domestic violence and other issues, I went through the foster care system, went to college, honorably served in the military, then came out, and then I started working for the department in a family-based role. And what that is that's family-based safety services in Texas. And what that is what we do is we go into the homes and we work with people one-on-one to try to keep the kids in the home, so there's not a removal.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. I don't think I've ever heard of that part of CPS before. Like, you usually just hear about the kid being removed from a bad situation. So that's actually pretty interesting. And before we continue, thank you so much for your service. We are a very veteran-friendly show.
Oh, yes.
So I actually did a little bit of research about domestic violence, and I'm going to go into my own experience. I talked about it in another episode very briefly, so I'll kind of do the same thing, just like briefly go over it. But I wanted to look into the history of domestic violence. I love history, and watching a lot of historical shows or documentaries, you see how women are treated. So I was really interested to find out, when was basically domestic violence, when did it become illegal and be considered a crime? And it was actually in 1920 is when all of the states decided that it was illegal, but it wasn't until the 1970s that the criminal justice system really began to treat it as a serious crime and not just a private family matter. I found that very interesting that 1970 was not that long ago. I wasn't born then, but that kind of blows my mind that it took that long for people to realize that it is a serious issue.
Well, and the thing about it is, if you look back in the 1950s, the problems in the home were, like you said, they were considered family matters. And due to society and the way that they treated relationships, it's not unheard of to think of that would be the way they thought of it. Even though it was a crime, we also saw that the victimizers and the victims were just told to go home and deal with it. And that brings up a great point that I wanted to go back to. One of the things you were talking about, gender roles. One of the things that I wanted to point out, so that everybody knows, gender has no role in victimization. I talked about the society and how they perceive things, and one of the things that I stress to everybody is anybody can be a victim.
Right.
And the problem is that in society we tell men, hey, we want you to be strong, we want you to be in an alpha male type of role, so that, if you were to say I'm a victim, most people, and I mean most police departments are male driven, or majority of them are male, and so they would be looked down upon. And so that's one thing. As we're going, I want to just point out that, hey, let's remember, abusers, victims, they don't play a specific role: gender, race, nationality, social economic group. We hear about certain ones more, but it doesn't make the other ones less.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, I pulled up a fact that it says 1 in 5 women and 1 in 7 men have actually been victims of physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. So I never realized that the numbers were that close, but I mean, what you said, and then the statistic that basically backs it up, that anyone can be a victim and gender roles don't play a role in it.
Well, and the other part that's important to look at is not only the numbers that are reported, but also look at the numbers that aren't reported. One of the things that I had a issue with in college was I had a domestic abuse class that I decided to write a paper on males as the victims. And my teacher didn't agree, and we went round and round. I still got an A, but still. One of the things that really got to me was when people just place him as the abuser.
Right.
And I think it's really important that we all think about, taking the gender out of it and just talking about, okay, who's the abuser? Who's the victim? And once we get that part established, remember that, one of the things that you had mentioned was about the numbers that you had reported. A number that you didn't mention, and I think is really, really super important, and that is the same-sex relationship reporting as well. Because you may have 1 in 4 females and you may have 1 in 7 males, but then break that down into, are, gay relationships, are they reporting the same numbers as heterosexual numbers? If you take a very classic case, the one in New York, it's the Geneva. Do you know which one I'm talking about? It's
I'm not sure.
It's a sociological principle where it's the one where the girl was stabbed repeatedly and nobody reported it.
Oh, is that the one where the crowd watched and nobody said anything? Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
I want to say her name was Geneva Campos. I'm sure listeners are probably saying, "This is what it is. Get it right. But I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of it. But what's important about that situation is one of the things that is not well known is that there were people calling, but there was another reason why that particular building wasn't calling in as much. And there's 2 factors. One, it was because it was in New York. It was an African American victim, and she was lesbian. And that building was predominantly gay couples. And the girl that was reported as her friend for majority of the story, it was never reported that was her girlfriend. And so as people were attacking this girl, verbally saying, "Hey, why didn't you call for your roommate?" This girl was having to suffer through knowing her partner was abused or it was murdered.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But couldn't say anything. So if you look at a murder and this lesbian couple can't tell people that they're a couple, so that slows things down. Then you also look at why people weren't reporting to the police as much. It makes more sense. Now you take that same situation and you put it in a domestically violent situation. 2 gay men are fighting and one of them calls 911. Or if that happens, somebody could call in and say, "Hey, there's a couple of guys fighting," and that could be dismissed. They could say, "Oh, it's just a bar brawl," or it's 2 brothers, boys being boys.
Right. No, that's an excellent point that I totally overlooked, and I'm glad that you're looking at it very objectively. Actually, her name was Kitty Genovese. So okay. You're close, but I want to fact check myself or fact check us before anyone else has the opportunity to. So I am really interested to hear about your experience as a CPS worker and what you've seen.
Well, before we get into that, you promised to tell us all a story
Oh, yes.
of
yes.
your story. So you tell, I really want to hear this.
I feel like I should give everyone like the abridged version since I did mention it before. My situation happened while I was in college. I was in a 3-year relationship with this person, and it was a rocky relationship pretty much from the start. Just deceit and lies. But my whole mindset was, here's this guy, he really likes me. This is my first true boyfriend. Maybe this is how relationships work, and you just work through it and it gets better over time. Well, the fact of the matter is it didn't get better over time. And the big thing with our relationship, it wasn't so much physical as it was psychological. So there were a lot of times I felt that I was completely crazy. Like I would find a text message in his phone from a girl and it's like, oh, she's just a friend, you're overreacting. It was you're crazy. One really pivotal moment in our relationship it really made me rethink everything. He left his Facebook up and I found messages with him and this girl, and he was telling her that I was crazy, that I was stalking him, that we weren't dating, that we never dated, that I was just in love with him. And this girl, the way she responded, it seemed as if she believed everything that he said. And for me, that was obviously really hurtful, but I came to this realization that he would say anything to make himself look like he wasn't the bad person or that he was the innocent one. Things escalated from there eventually, and the one time that I absolutely knew that I had to get out of that relationship, we'd been arguing for a few days, and I told him I was done, I was over it, and I was in my room, and I stayed on the 3rd floor of this apartment complex. And I remember it was like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and it was a pretty quiet complex. And I remember seeing car lights, and I just thought it was so weird. Like, who would be driving around my complex at this time? At this time, it was pretty sleepy college town. And something told me to get up and go into my closet. And so that's what I did. And I sat there, and next thing I knew, I heard him beating on the door. And my roommate was there. And she was telling him that he needed to leave, and he said no, and she was like, I'm going to call the police if you don't leave. So he ended up breaking into the apartment. He came into my room. He was looking for me. He started acting hysterical, crying, everything. And I'm still in the closet, so I just hear him. And he's crying, saying that he's sorry. He didn't mean to do anything. He can't live without me. And then he leaves my room and he locks himself into our bathroom, and he starts talking about killing himself and how he can't live without me and all of these things. And so my friend, she got really freaked out, and she was definitely the champion there for dealing with him. She eventually called the police and he left, but maybe like 3, 4, 5 seconds, I don't know, after he walked out, we heard a gunshot, and we were so freaked out. We were like, oh my God, did he shoot at the apartment? Did he shoot himself? I come out of my closet running. I'm thinking that this guy has killed himself because he was so in love with me, and that I'm the reason that he's dead, and what will people think of me? And oh my God, I had all these things, and I'm running towards the door, and I'm like, I gotta go see him, and I have to go make sure, if he is still alive, and all these things. And my friend, she stopped me. She's like, do not walk out of this apartment. She was like, he did not kill himself. She's like, I can guarantee you that is not what's going on. She's like, if you walk out, he will kill you. She was like, I just know it. And so I didn't. And 15 minutes later, the cops showed up. He was gone. And I think when the cops came and they said that nobody was out there, that more so than him shooting a gun really hit me, because it just really made me think, oh my God, he really will do anything to make me care about him or come back to him or whatever. But all throughout that time, it was just, making me feel like I was crazy, making me feel like I wasn't good enough. There were several instances where he choked me or he threw me on the car. We even had a witness, and I was going to take it to court, but somehow he talked to the guy and his dad talked to the guy, and the guy was like he wasn't going to say anything, or he wasn't going to basically, go to court and vouch for me. But he saw the whole thing. So there was a lot there that should have been red flags, but when you're blinded by love, you just don't think. But those were definitely some of the scariest times of my life, and it's probably why I'm still single.
All right, let me break some of this down for you. Let me see if I can get an understanding. So you tell me how much of this sounds like what you went through. So basically the relationship starts off well. He's really complimentary. You're the primary focus. Over time, things start getting a little, as the new wears off, he starts becoming more agitated. Nothing you can do is right. You're walking around on eggshells. You're trying to figure out what's going to set him off next. So you start justifying stuff. He says he's got anger management issues, or, you had talked about that girl's just a friend. It's not what you think it is. The minimizing. And then over time, the abuse starts. But the way it starts off is it's really push and pull. And what I mean by push and pull, it's basically he'll cuss near you. If you object, he'll stop. If you don't, the next time he cusses at you. And then if you object, he'll apologize. If not, he'll go to the next one. It starts off with a push, and then it grabs a pull. Each time is a different maneuver, but it's progressively worse. The behaviors that I heard you talking about, the minimizing, the justifications, the controlling behaviors, the doing something that would make you uncomfortable, you objecting, him apologizing, promising it'll get better, but it doesn't. One of the other things that I heard you talk about was how do I put it? It's when we get into a relationship and we think every relationship I've had up to this point hasn't worked, and probably it's me. So they do something wrong. We kind of forgive it or we give in, but then they get more power and they can do what they're going to do. Does that sound familiar to what happened with you?
Yeah, it actually sounds very familiar.
And that's very common. We were talking about, basically there are three types there's emotional, verbal, sexual, and physical abuse. And a lot of these behaviors, they're not mutually exclusive. There's research proving that people who are verbally abusive are also emotionally abusive. And the things that are emotionally abusive, and you kind of touched on it too. You said he would tell me I'm not good, or I'm not good enough, or what an abuser does is they take these different components to knock you down. That is why when you look at it, you can sit there and say, why is she putting up with this? But the person in that relationship doesn't see it. They don't see the problem. And you kind of touched on it earlier as well. You said, well, love is blind. And I have a whole research on the first 2 years of a relationship, and my podcast, The Victim's Voice, talks about that. And it talks about that 2-year period in the beginning of a relationship where it's easy, where there are concerns noted, and we as the people in the relationship will dismiss them or minimize them. Somebody could come to you and say, hey, you're the guy you're talking to right now he's been married 5 times. And then you could sit there and say, well, he just had a bad string of luck and I'm going to be the one who changes that. No.
Yeah. Actually, so what you said is so accurate, because I had so many of my friends, they would be like, hey, this guy, he's not right, or, like, he said this, I've heard him say this, I've seen him do this, I've heard this about him. And I'm like, you guys, I'm the one that's gonna change him. Like, this is gonna be okay. So I find it interesting how it's almost like a phenomenon of people, like, that's what we do.
So we as social workers, we go into these homes and we see all of these things, and to us, they're nothing new. The story remains the same. The actors are the only thing that change. So, and that's why social workers are good, because they can come in and they see the same movie, but different actors. The story still plays out the same exact way, but it's just different people playing. And so when we come in and we're talking to families and we're saying, hey, I understand how the domestic violence cycle goes. I know that, at first you started the relationship and you were like, well, I knew this would cause a problem, but I didn't fight it because I just didn't want to cause an argument, or I just wanted to just ease the tensions in the home. But that ended up being a win for them. And people who are abusive, their only goal is to win every single battle and ultimately win the war. So every time you give in, they win. When they collect enough victories, then you have changed who you are, because you've curbed this part, this part, this part. You are no longer a square peg. You are now a round peg. And you fit exactly what they want. I used to tell families, when I would work with families, I would say, if you look at a grain of sand, it's not too impressive, is it? I mean, you could pick up a grain of sand, you could blow it away. But you take 1,000 pieces of sand and you high pressurize them. Now they can grind down stone. They can carve the Grand Canyon. They can do impressive things when they're added together and there's force behind it. That is exactly what words do to people. He starts off by saying a cuss word in front of you. When you don't get crazy about it, then he can go. He can get a little crazier. Now, typically, I keep things kind of clean. So, I will say, first it starts off where he'll say bitch around you. Okay. And that if that doesn't affect you, then it's okay. And he'll go on. Then the next time you guys are angry, you're arguing, he'll call you a bitch. And then if you don't get too crazy about it, then the next time he argues with you, he'll say, why are you always a bitch? So you see what I'm saying? So each argument compounds on itself. And then we get to the part where he'll push you the first time. And then when you retaliate against that, he'll apologize. He'll promise he'll never do that again. The next time it's a slap. The next time it's a punch. The next time it's a kick to the head. And one of the things I also worry about is if there are physical changes, if you're pregnant, definitely watch out for your safety, because a lot of times that's when abuse happens. Another thing to watch out for that's really equally as important that I didn't mention earlier, and that is the mindset of a victimizer. A victimizer, they want to get you away from everybody. And this probably played a part in your relationship as well, where he'll start telling you, well, I really don't like you talking to that guy over there. I don't like how much time you spend with your friend. Do you really have to go see your mom every day? Do you really have to call her this much? What they're doing is they're putting a distance between you and those people that are going to try to talk sense into you. Because when you're isolated, you don't know what they're doing is crazy. It's just what they do. So when you're isolated away from your friends, your support systems, the people that would pull you apart and go, hey, you really need to look at this. Once he gets you away from all of that, then it's not him being abusive to you. It's you guys just, quote unquote, have arguments. And they just get a little, quote unquote, out of hand at times. So once he gets you away from that stuff, the verbal abuse, the mental abuse, that can escalate into either by themselves, or then they can also be added to physical abuse.
So I found that very interesting, and one thing that I noticed in our relationship was not only getting me away from my support system, but also his support system. What he would do, he would say things about me to make me look a certain way toward them. So eventually when it all blew up, it was like, oh, she's a liar. Oh, she starts drama. Oh, she's overreacting. Those were the things that he was feeding them. And I'm like, no, I'm not. Like, this is actually happening to me. So I found that interesting after the relationship. After I had some time to think about it, that he was just basically setting the stage to make himself, look, I guess, like the prodigal son or something.
Well, and you said it. Here's the thing. He softened the blow. And that's, what he did. If you had a problem with a guy and you knew that he was going to go make a police report on you, if you went to the police before he did, then when he does, it doesn't sound all crazy. If you started saying, hey, he's been punching me, and then you were actually the victimizer and you attacked him, then when he made a legitimate police call, they'll be like, well, we already got her saying he's been smacking her for 6 months. So we're not going to take what he says at face value. That is very much what they do. Because first off, you don't mistake his friends, his family, they know who he is. They know his tendencies. But if he comes to them before you do and starts degrading your character before you make an outcry, when you make that outcry, it's not going to sound as legitimate.
Right.
So it's going to be easier for him to defend his actions. If he says, hey, homegirl's crazy. She just doesn't leave me alone. She's stalking me. She's doing all these things. Then when you come out and you say, hey, he legitimately put his hands on me, they're going to be like, well, we already know you're stalking him.
No, that's so true, because that's exactly how I felt. And when he was talking to that one female and he was saying that, and I was just like, no, I'm not. Like, for me, like, none of it made sense. Like, we were always together. We were always doing things together. So how was I stalking him? Like, it'd be different if you didn't see us, like, having dinner together or, like, walking our dogs together. But somehow his ability to make people believe what he said just kind of put this thought into her head that it was true. I was totally dumbfounded by that.
But see, you're looking at it at a different level. See, here's the thing. You're looking at it like he was just denying you being in a relationship. I guarantee you $100, sight unseen, I guarantee you that girl was attractive and he was trying to talk to her. What he was doing is he was distancing himself from you so that he could make a play on her later. Because what he's doing is he's saying, hey, this girl is always around, so he's given a reason why you're around. He minimizes his role in that relationship so that when she sees you two together, she can say, oh, poor him, he's such the victim, she won't leave him alone. But in the end, he's really just maintaining the relationship with you, but distancing himself enough so that he can still pursue her at some point.
Makes total sense.
Do you know after the fact, had he ever tried to reach out and try to hook up with her or anything?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think every girl that I've ever encountered in his phone or that he was friends with, like, he tried to have some type of sexual or more than friendly relationship with.
Okay. But I mean, that right there, again, this is one of those things where I can look back and I'm not going to lie. I mean, I'm a dude, and at, some point, I think we all think along that way at some point. But this is very characteristic of what an abuser will do. I'm not saying just because guys are guys, they're going to be abusers. But what I'm saying is those were two different thoughts. But you take that understanding, and then you take the fact that he's sitting there trying to get you away from everybody. He's trying to build up his support system. He's minimizing your support system. And then he's giving you the guilt trips. He's sitting there saying, I can't go on without you. You make me complete, whatever. But at the same time, he's doing things that undermine your self-worth. People who are strong emotionally do not leave abusers. So an abuser, to keep somebody around, has to degrade that sense of self to the point where that victim really feels he's the only one who understands me. He's the only one that will put up with my behaviors or my craziness. If he's successful in getting you to believe that you're crazy and that nobody else will take you, that you are actually, in fact, lucky that he sees past your crazy, your quote unquote crazy. If he can get that side of you so minimized, then you actually thank him for being the one to provide safety, security, and love to what he has deemed an unworthy partner.
I'm quiet because what you're saying is, there are things that I kind of have thought about, but could never really have it completely formulated in my mind. So like here now, I'm like, oh my God, like how did I not see this? Like it makes so much sense. And honestly, it almost makes me feel bad about myself now. But at the same time, I know that I shouldn't be victimizing myself. Like I was in that situation, and not that I didn't know what was going on, but because of what he was doing, I think I wasn't able to think clearly. And so now that I'm several years removed from that, just here and I'm like, oh my God, like this is so real. And I feel like I've seen other people that are definitely in the same situation. So
First off, do not feel bad about yourself, okay? That's first. Second, do you have a piece of paper in front of you?
I do.
Okay, all right. So go ahead and put that paper hold it up, but hold it far away from your face as you possibly can. Can you read the first line in your mind? Can you read that first line?
Yes.
Okay. Now hold that same piece of paper about 1/4 inch from your face. Can you read the second line?
No.
Okay. That is exactly what your relationship was like. Okay. Now that you're distanced, you can see the whole thing. When you're in it, when you're dealing with the conflict on a day-to-day basis, you're not going to see all the minute details. That is why people in a relationship that have conflict could see it a mile away, can see it when it happens to their friends, but don't see it when it's right there in front of them. Be thankful that you got out safely. Be thankful that you learned something from that. Don't beat yourself up about it, because all you're going to do is beat yourself up about it, and that's useless. That does not help anybody. If a negative experience is learned from, it's a positive in the end. And I'm gonna reference back to my podcast, because one of the things that I talk to my audience about is, one of the biggest things is, if you're a single person and you're looking to get into a relationship, one of the things that you have to do for yourself to ensure that the people that you're putting around you is making sure that you establish who you are, what makes you feel safe. And then you can go on to start talking about, well, what is it I want in my life? And when you're away from that conflict, it's easier to start putting in those criteria. Well, I want somebody that's outgoing, that's energetic, that likes the outdoors, that doesn't have a problem with dogs. But when you get right up on it and you're sitting there, you see this cute guy at the gas station and you're like, whoa, I want to talk to him. You haven't done all those things to double check to make sure that he likes dogs. Because he could be the cutest guy on the block, but guess what? If he hates dogs, that's not going to work.
Yeah. That is an excellent point. And actually one of the things that I did, it took me a few years, but I actually read a book about boundaries, which is what you're talking about. And it basically was an instruction guide of how to set your boundaries and how to know when someone crosses those boundaries and how to not make. And exception for someone that crosses the boundaries. And it was a very, I don't want to say mellow, but it was a very, nice approach of how to let someone know that they've crossed these boundaries and that it's not okay, and then how to, you know, come back and find yourself, and then to make sure that you stick to your guns, and how you'll have more fulfilled relationships that way. And that book was very, very helpful for me going on into my future relationships.
What I would say about that is, and boundaries are good. We need boundaries. But the problem with that is it, again, we're going back to what I was talking about earlier. And that is, you need to establish who you are, what makes you feel safe. You know, personally, I know for me, I need to make sure that I have a roof over my head. I have to have enough money to pay my bills, and I need to make sure that my dogs are safe. Once that stuff is in place, then I can go up from there. And so when you're talking about boundaries, you're talking about, think about your apartment, or I know in your last episode, you're talking about buying a house, but when you're talking about boundaries, you're talking about the perimeter walls of the house. I'm talking about your front door. You know, don't let somebody get to your front door. You know, that may be along the outside of the boundaries, but if you're worrying about the boundaries, worry about what it looks like in your living room. You know, what does this guy need to have before he even gets that close to know where you live, let alone get around those boundaries? Establish who you are, establish what you feel safe. When you see what it is that you want in your life and what you don't want in your life, and then you look at your past trauma, the domestic violence, the verbal abuse, the emotional abuse, you can sit there and say, okay, certain traits of an abuser also translate into abusive traits later. Abusers are typically charming, easygoing, they're complimentary in the beginning. But these traits, they wear off right away, pretty quickly for an abuser. Mm-hmm. So when you start noticing that these traits are falling off, if you start noticing that they're minimizing their interactions with other people, if they're putting you at a place where you have to start distancing yourself from people that you normally would hang out with, red flags everywhere. Do not wait till you get that uneasy feeling. Recognize those red flags. Put up your boundaries. Be like, whoa.
Right.
I am who I am. I am going to spend time with my friends. If you can't deal with that, then maybe we don't need to be together. I have a close relationship with my family. If I can't call my mom when I need to, then maybe you're not the person I need to be with. The person that I'm going to be with is going to understand my quirks, understand my strengths, understand my weaknesses, and my needs. If I need to talk to my family and friends, and you can't meet those needs, then we can't be together. And this goes back to the creating that expectation so that these people can't get into your boundaries, into your living room, into your mind to end up being a victimizer. But it's not one of those things that it's easy to sit back and go, well, Lenny told me to make sure that I check these boxes. Sir, can you come a little closer? I need you to check off these boxes. You know, are you charming a week after? You know, it doesn't happen that way. And I understand that. But these are things that if you want to ensure your safety, if the listeners want to ensure their safety, then make sure that you're providing for your needs. So when you get into a relationship, when you get people around you, they're only adding to your life. Because if people come into your life and they're taking stuff, if they're not adding, they're taking stuff from your life.
Right.
So when I work as a CPS worker and I go into these homes and I'm sitting there talking to these people about your primary goal is keep your kids in your home. I understand that and I want to make that happen. But how do we do that? Because clearly there was domestic violence, whether it happened, and the way I would talk to people is I'd say, hey, you know what? I wasn't here. I wasn't sitting across the table. I don't know what happened. I'm going to tell you what the state is saying, and then I'm going to tell you what my boss would tell me that I need to do before we can close this case. My goal is to get you to understand that if this happened, We need to work on it to make sure that if these stressors came back, it wouldn't happen again. So in the real world, if a husband came home and he was doing something and it led to a conflict, which led to abuse of the parent or even a child, then we need to address the stressors. And that's where the family-based safety service workers come in. That's where we come in. We say, hey, I've dealt with so many other families. These are things that have worked for them. If they work for you, great. If not, we'll find something else.
That is, I really like that. That's amazing. That you guys go out and do that and provide that service. Like I said, I wasn't aware that that was as part of the CPS. So I think that's awesome. So I'm curious. You mentioned earlier that you went into foster care. So how or did you being in foster care, did that impact or have an effect on how you did your job?
That is a great, great question. One of the things that I really noticed was there was one day I sat across the table from a grandfather who had his grandchildren in the home, and he was looking at me like I was an idiot. He was looking at a young kid coming in, especially, I'm a dude. You can't get around it. 9 out of 10 workers at the department are female. And that is, one of those things where people just assume that a female is going to be more compassionate than a male will. And so he's sitting there looking across the table at me, and he's looking like he wants to fight. And finally I sat down and I said, I can tell you all day that I know exactly what you're going through, but you're not going to believe me. I said, I remember the day that I was removed from my family by CPS and I attacked the caseworker. I remember that vividly.
Wow.
And so when I come into your home and I tell you that I have empathy for your situation, I know where you're at, then I'm saying that from my heart. The last thing I want to do is put a kid into a foster care system. Now, don't get me wrong. Foster care, it's needed, but there's a place for it.
Right.
If there's a way to avoid that happening, then we need to find every way to make that happen. And that means if a parent is going through drug issues, let's get them into counseling. Let's get them a support system. Let's figure out that issue so that the other dominoes don't fall and these kids are removed, needlessly. So when I went through that foster care system, and to answer your question, I took those negative experiences in the foster care system and said to myself, hey, this is what I'm going to do to try everything I can to help these people understand that this is the problem. This is the destination we want to get to. These are the steps we have to do before we can get there. We all want the same thing. We all want the safety of the children, but we also want the underlying conflicts resolved so that this doesn't happen again in the future. I would tell people, hey, I can close your case tomorrow. I really can. I can close it tomorrow, but that doesn't change the problems that led up to the conflict that got the department involved in the first place. And one thing I have seen over and over is we can close that case, but if we haven't fixed those problems, it doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter what town, state, whatever. If you have behaviors that lead to a call to CPS, it's going to happen again. And by using my experience in the foster care system, I could sit down with kids and talk to them and say, hey, I know where you're at. I know what's going on with you. Or I can tell you what I would be feeling. I don't know what you're feeling, but I can tell you what I was feeling when it happened to me. And when you can open up to kids that are looking at possibly going into foster care, families that don't want their kids to go into foster care, and grandparents who are doing everything they can to fix the situation with their kids that is causing their grandkids to be threatened to be put into foster care, they open up and they're now willing to listen on a level that you couldn't get just by walking in saying, I'm CPS, I'm a state official, this is what you're going to do.
Right. So basically building rapport with those kids and with that family, and you can better affect change in their situation.
But it has to be on a deep level.
Right.
Because I can go and I can joke with a kid, and that's okay. But when they understand where I came from, and then I'm not the typical run-of-the-mill worker, then they can say, okay, now I want to get on your side. What do we need to do to fix this?
So I'm curious, from some of your cases that you've dealt with, have you, or did you notice kids that you were able to, the families that you were able to help so that the kids didn't have to be removed from the home? Did you notice a difference in that child's, I guess, quality of life? I don't know how long you guys follow up versus those who had to be taken out of the home.
Well, it all goes back to the natural biological desire of children to want to be with their parents. It does not matter how abusive that home life is or situation is. They're going to want to be with their parents. It's unavoidable. And anytime you can get kids to remain in the home and get the family to work on the issues so that they can all be a unit, those kids are going to be more successful. But one of the things that we focused on is not necessarily dealing with the things that were on the top of it. We were dealing with core issues. I used to tell especially some of my younger moms, I would tell them, hey, I can sit there and I can slap a Band-Aid over a wound all day long, but that doesn't cause it not to come back. We need to rip off that Band-Aid. We need to scrub it down. We need to get it, antiseptic on it. And then we can bandage it up and you can live happily ever after. But we need to look at all of the core things that are going on, and then we need to be able to work on what led up to that. That's going to create a better environment overall. Because if we may have gotten in for domestic violence, okay, but that's not, I can sit there and say, okay, well, I'm going to send the abuser to batterer's intervention program. But that's just getting him or her to admit that there was a problem. But we have to address the bigger issue. If you address the conflict in the home, then not only are you minimizing the chances that it's going to turn into a physical altercation later, but you're also improving the quality of life for the children in the home. Kids who don't have to worry about their family fighting have a higher chance of doing better in school, getting full night's sleep, not worrying about conflict at home, not wanting to avoid the home at all costs. So their quality of life when you're dealing with all of the issues is that much better overall and have a better chance of succeeding in life. You were talking about the success of kids that we worked with.
Right.
The really big important thing to think about long term is when we come in and we work with this family, we're teaching them how to stop the conflict in the home or work on it at least. Well, that has a bigger, much larger effect. Because when these kids can see what a dysfunctional relationship looks like and then see what a functional relationship looks like, it is stereotypically proven that stereotypically boys who witness men who are abusers have a higher likelihood of becoming abusers later in life. Girls who see their parents as victims are more likely to be a victim later in life. So when we look at us getting involved and there being this kind of chaos in the home, and then we work on the issues, and then now they can see, we didn't like it when daddy was angry all the time. We didn't like it when daddy said all these mean things to mommy.
Right.
Well, all these kids have seen is negative behavior modeled to them. So if they don't make a conscious decision, this is not how I want to be, then they are doomed to repeat that cycle of violence. But if they're given an opportunity to see what the difference looks like and how two functional adults interact appropriately, then they have a higher likelihood of not repeating the victimization and victim roles and to be able to have long-term, better relationships when they get older and they're in those relationships.
I think you kind of bring up a good point, and I talk about this sometimes with my friends. I wish in school and high school that there was a class on relationships. I think if I'd had that class, and obviously probably many other girls, if we had that class maybe in middle school or high school about relationships and what is a functional relationship, what is a dysfunctional relationship, what is abuse, what is an abuse, if we'd had a class that taught us those things, I think you would probably see the instance, possibly, I'm not sure, but you may see the instances of domestic violence drop because women would, well, not necessarily women, anyone who took those classes, like once they, I had to correct myself.
I got you to stop saying her and him. Hey, I won.
Yes, you did. But anyone who took those classes, they would, recognize those signs probably fairly quickly and realize that that's not a situation that they needed to be in. And I don't know about anyone else's school, but my school was notorious for having useless like home ec classes that I did not use anything from, and I don't remember. But a lot of times I just think, man, if there was like some class about relationships, like that would have been so useful for me and anyone else who decided to take that, because there are a lot of people who don't know what a functional relationship is. They may see something on television and TV like over glamorizes thing. I know I grew up on Disney, so obviously I had that whole Disney princess complex where I just assumed that if the guy is super charming, then he must be my Prince Charming, for a while until, real world hit me. But a lot of times people don't have anyone in their life, adults, their parents, family, friends, relatives, whatever, that have those functional relationships. So what they see is how they think the world is until, they get out and go to college and be around different people, and then they start to see these things. But for some of us, it's too late. Like, we just assumed that this was life and we got ourselves in these situations, and it took something, in my experience, something truly horrifying for me to realize that this was not okay and this was not normal, even though throughout the whole time I guess I kind of knew it wasn't normal, but it took something for me to really, for that light bulb to basically go off and say, okay, this really isn't normal. So I just wanted to make that point.
Girl, let's be real. It didn't matter whether that class happened in high school or not. Here's the thing. You would have looked at that class as useless as you do that home ec class. Here's the thing. People don't take information until they want it or need it. So it wouldn't have mattered if you had this class when you were in high school. If you looked at it like third period math, you wouldn't have cared. It would have been nice that you were exposed to it. And I agree with you. I think that they need to start exposing people to that. But the problem is, until we hit conflict, we don't change who we are. We don't change what we're doing. If you've done something a certain way your whole life and it's worked for you, why would you just get up one morning and say, I'm going to change? You're not. So I agree with you. I think when we're talking about the princess mentality and Disney life, we need to incorporate what a functional relationship looks like. Start modeling that. But let's be honest, it's not sexy. Hollywood
Very
doesn't
true.
consider it's not sexy to have a mom and dad be able to communicate appropriately and have each other meeting each other's needs. It is more glamorous and more sexy to have Empire, where a homegirl is hitting homeboy with a bat. That is what Hollywood considers sexy. So that's what you see.
So,
now,
I feel like maybe Hollywood feeds off of our need to be dysfunctional. It seems like it's very human to be dysfunctional. So maybe they're just feeding off of some deep-seated need within us. I don't know. But sometimes, and I don't know if this is like totally off point, but there are a lot of times like there's certain types of music that I don't listen to because I think it sends the wrong message. And I feel like if I hear it over and over again, I'll start to think that it's normal. I know there's some social experiment. I can't think of the name of it right now. But, you start to think that it's okay. So at one point I just decided I'm not going to listen to this kind of music anymore. I'm not going to watch these kind of shows anymore because I don't want this to be something that that my brain is processing all the time, and somehow I make myself think that it's okay. But at the same time, sometimes I miss like the drama, like Keeping Up with the Kardashians or something, or Jersey Shore. Jersey Shore was one of my favorites, where it's just like constant drama, and it's so interesting and tantalizing, and it's like you need it, and it's like I feel that Hollywood feeds off of that, but then it hurts us in the end because we think it's okay, and then we start to let it seep into our lives.
Well, you brought up two really good things, and I want to cover them real quick. First one is, it's a chaos-driven life. When we see others have more chaos in their lives, then it makes the chaos in our lives not seem so bad. So when we see crazy things on TV, Jerry Springer, finding out who the baby daddy is on was it Maury Povich back in the day? When you're looking at people's lives that are so crazy and so out of the norm, having an argument with your partner at home is not so bad. So it makes our lives feel that much more simple. Now, the other thing that you said, and I think it's really important, I think because you touched on it a little bit. One sermon I heard one Sunday morning was, what you hear goes in your ear, to your brain, to your heart, and out your mouth. So if you continue to put negative things into your ears and then you just keep listening to it, well, sooner or later it's going to get to your brain. It's going to change the way your brain is processing. Then it's going to get to your heart where you value things. Once it gets to your heart and you start to kind of value it, then it's going to spill out your mouth. So it's not necessarily harmless to listen to people, downgrade women or to do all these things, because sooner or later, if that's all you're listening to, then that's what you're going to start believing. That's what you're going to start instilling. And then sooner or later, you're going to be saying it. So I agree with you. If you don't want something in your life, don't have it around you. If you don't want to say something, you don't want to believe something, then don't even listen to it.
No, that's perfect. And that's exactly, at some point, I really think it was like 2 years ago, I was like, why am I listening to this trash? Like, I can see it manifesting in my life. And so I stopped, and I feel like my quality of life has definitely improved since I have cut out what I like to call hot garbage, trash.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. I tell people all the time, I'm like, if you want to improve your situation, if you want to improve your life, then put yourself around people who are doing the things that you want to do. I had a guy tell me one time, he said, doesn't every guy step up and take care of his kids? I said, no, not every guy does. That's why it's so unique. And he said, well, all my friends, they take care of their kids. I said, that's why they're your friends, because they're doing the things that you would do. People who are making bad choices surround themselves with people who are making bad choices. That continues to allow them to make the choices which end up being negative. If you want something you've never had, you need to do something you've never done. If you want success, but yet you've only seen failure, then change what is around you. If you want strong female role models, then surround yourself with strong female role models. Don't sit there and complain that you want one thing, but yet you go do another. Don't talk about you want to go to heaven, but yet you want to be listening to music that's talking about killing everybody and everything, but yet you want to go to church on Sunday and talk about how you want to love your fellow man. It ain't going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, and it's so true because I see it all the time, and thankfully not my friends. I'm very selective about who I decide to surround myself with, but I see it in, my associates, and I'm just like you make no sense to me. Like, what you're doing and what you're doing and what you say you want don't match up, and I don't understand how you're okay with yourself, basically.
Because they're lying to themselves. They're telling themselves they can be successful without doing the work. That's what it is. If you want to live a good Christian lifestyle, then you need to do the things that would lead to a good Christian lifestyle. If you want to be successful in business, then you need to be doing the things that are going to make you successful in business. You don't say you want to be successful in business and then go eat at Cece's for 12 hours. It ain't going to happen. Unless your business is Cece's in pizza.
Yeah.
Unless that's your business, then you have nothing to hang your hat on at the end of the day and say, you know what, I was successful today.
So that'll do it for part 1 of this episode. Stay tuned for next week when I release the second half. And I apologize if I sound a little nasally. Sighs. I don't feel very well this week, but hopefully next week I'll get back to my sultry voice, as Roger calls it. Oh, and before I forget, today's episode was edited by Shane Burnett of Spartacus Audio Editors. What a freaking awesome name, Spartacus Audio Editors. His information will be in the show notes. Later. Gorgo out.